Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Lisa Olszewski. I'm the founder of the American Institute of Healthy Living, and I have an amazing guest with us today. You probably know her from different TV appearances, but she's definitely a celebrity nutrition expert. She has been featured as one of the co-hosts of TLC's Freaky Eats. She's also the health expert for Dr. Phil, has had appearances on PBS on the Dr. Oz Show, from Rachel Ray, the Today Show, along with Access Hollywood. So our guest today I'm so honored to have you here, is JJ Virgin. She's written 4 New York Times bestselling books, including cookbooks as well. You'll know her from the Virgin Diet, along with the JJ Virgin Sugar Impact Diet. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. All right. So say your last name slowly.
Olszewski.
Okay.
So we're doing this Keto 101 Summit, and I'm so honored to have you as a part of it. So I know you have seen just the healthcare in America where everybody is addicted to this thing called sugar, but they don't realize they're addicted, right? So I don't think they even realize how often they're consuming sugar. So tell me some of the places that people don't even realize they're eating sugar on a daily basis.
I'm going to steal a line that I love that Dr. Mark Hyman used on one of my podcasts, where he said, sugar is our #1 recreational drug of choice. And you're right, Lisa, it's like sneaking into places and you think you're eating, you're not eating sugar. You don't realize that these dressings and sauces and spices, like they're getting spiked with sugar because you can't, when you have a little bit of sugar, you know what you want.
Right.
More. Yeah, it's absolutely frightening. And when I wrote the Virgin Diet, the biggest question I got asked about was sugar. And it seemed like people either were confused. They were like, but this thing has no calories. It's okay, right? And they were talking about like Splenda or one of these horrific things. Or they go, listen, it's all natural. It's honey. It'll be fine, Or they just said, listen, I can't give up the sugar. I can give up everything else, but not the sugar. I'm like, well, the most important thing to give up is the sugar. So,
right.
Yes.
So let's go a little bit about that, because so often I think there's this connotation out there where people are like, well, it's sugar-free. It's got to be good for me. Right.
Oh, boy.
So let's talk about those sweeteners.
When that whole thing shifted, and I remember it when Susan Powter, do you remember Susan Powter?
I don't.
Okay, Stop the Insanity. She was the gal who was like, everything was to get the sugar out. And it happened when Bruce Ames went and read the cholesterol studies wrong, said fat was the villain causing heart disease, discredited John Yudkin, who was this brilliant, way before his time researcher, nutritionist out of the UK, who was like, sugar is the root of all diseases. Like and he couldn't explain the mechanisms, but he knew it to be true, but he got completely slammed. And when this all happened, fat got nominated as the villain of creating all of these health problems. And so all the manufacturers started pulling fat out of foods. But, if you pull fat out, you got to put something in. So the first thing they did 2 different things. One was just to start putting sugar in. And then the other one was to put artificial sweeteners in. And when you think about artificial sweeteners, they were created so that diabetics could have their sweet. And the challenge is, the very reason we created them, they actually can create that problem, is what we now know. Because what happens when you do artificial sweeteners is they actually change the gut microbiome so that it's more glucose intolerant. Because and it didn't make sense at first, they were saying, all right, someone's doing artificial sweeteners, yet the Coke study showed that people who drank a regular soda a day had it versus a diet soda. The people who drank the diet soda had an inch bigger waist circumference. And they thought, well, they're having the Diet Coke and eating the pizza, right? They thought this is not causative. But then they started to look at, well, why would this be? Because they started to see more insulin resistance with people who were drinking sodas. And it was, sure enough, this change in the gut microbiome, which is crazy because the study showed that this happened in a week.
Wow.
A week. I know, like insane, that you could shift your gut microbiome in 1 week to be more glucose intolerant, which means you're going to pump out more insulin, which is going to lead to insulin resistance, lead to fat storing around the belly, lead to diabetes, pre-diabetes. I mean, just out of something that seems like it's innocuous and safe to eat because it doesn't have any calories.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, and it is. And so many people are so just swayed the wrong way with all of this. So thank you for bringing up all of that information with that. But how about, people will say, well, what about fruit sugars? Or what about, like you had said, honey, or it's natural, it's molasses, it's, and so let's talk about those sugars as well.
Those sugars. So, fruit, eating a piece of fruit with the fiber, hey, that's great. Unwrapping the fruit and making it into a juice. Apple juice has more fructose in it than a Coke does, because apples are higher in fructose than any other fruit. Drying a fruit turns it into candy. Concentrating fruit juice turns it into syrup. So the challenge is that it's not the sugar in fruit that's the problem. It's taking the sugar out of the fruit by juicing it, drying it, concentrating it, that creates the problem, gives us the big hit. When you think back, a couple thousand years ago, we never would have had little bears full of honey that were squeezing on things. We would have found a beehive, been able to get some honey, maybe, and that would have been it. But now we have ready access to these concentrated sugars that we never would have been able to get. And in fact, if you look back in the 1900s, where the obesity rate was less than 1%, I think it was 0.5%. Our sugar intake per person per year was 5 pounds.
That's crazy.
Now, our obesity rate just went further than our being overweight rate. So we're about 70% overweight or obese, but we're now more obese than overweight. And the average intake is over 150 pounds per person. It's the one thing we know that's, those things correlate perfectly, but it is because it's added into things, it's concentrated, and we've taken it out of how nature intended us for us to have it.
That's exactly right. That's absolutely right. How would you say to help give people baby steps or simple steps to get this out of their diet?
And I love that, because here's where I think the big problem is. And when I wrote the Sugar Impact Diet, I really felt like we've been looking at sugar all wrong. I think the glycemic index, while it was a good start, almost created as many problems as it solved, because it looks at your blood sugar response to a 50-gram dose of a food, which isn't how we eat. Someone doesn't sit down and go, I'm going to have 50 grams of carrots, right? And so the problem is we don't eat one food in isolation. We don't necessarily eat that amount. 50 grams of a potato is pretty reasonable. 50 grams of carrots, celery, broccoli, not reasonable. They wouldn't eat that much. So there's that piece of it. But it also didn't look at the insulin response, which is super important. And it also didn't look at fructose, because fructose doesn't raise blood sugar. So we really needed to look at sugar totally differently. We need to look at what happens to your blood sugar, your insulin, how much fructose is in the food, to really start to understand what we should be eating and how much we should be avoiding, right? Now, I don't remember, I got off on that tangent. And what was the question, Lisa?
Simple incorporating steps, and it's one of because so many people, and this is my thing that really frustrates me. When they're like, everything in moderation. I'm like, well, not really.
That's ridiculous. First of all, would you say that about mercury, arsenic, lead, cadmium?
That's exactly what I say.
Because honestly, sugar's like the most toxic thing that we're doing to ourselves on a regular basis is sugar. So everything in moderation is a ridiculous thing. If you knew that if you were celiac, is gluten okay in moderation?
Exactly. Or an alcoholic, is alcohol okay in moderation? Right. That drives me nuts too.
Makes me insane. I was actually on a nutrition panel at the Pennsylvania Women's Conference, and I was moderating this weight loss panel. And so I had to ask parting thoughts for all the guests. And one was this PhD nutritionist who was on the Today Show all the time, and she said, "My parting thoughts are, it's everything in moderation." And I thought, I couldn't let her have it, Lisa. I was like, and I'm the moderator. I'm not supposed to comment, but I'm like, I can't let that one lie, because this is what hurts everybody. So one of the big things I saw when I started to look at this, because when I wrote the book, was I really looked and went, we've got our framework wrong. We've got to go beyond the glycemic index. But I also went and I looked, why are we still struggling so much? So I went in and I started reading all the Amazon bad reviews about sugar books. And it was what I suspected. Most of these books tell you to quit cold turkey. And unless you could go into, say, Betty Ford for a month, this is not going to work because it's a drug and you'll have withdrawals.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike other drugs, you can't live without food. See, you can live without alcohol, cocaine, meth, whatever else you're addicted to. So you can but you can't live without food. So you've got a problem now, right?
Right.
So I went, we really first have to become super aware of where all the sugar is sneaking into our food and to recognize that 2 pieces of wheat bread have more of a sugar impact than actually a couple, sugar cubes, a couple tablespoons of sugar do. That marinara sauce can be loaded with sugar, can have more sugar than some Oreo cookies. So you have to really start to realize where all this sugar is sneaking in. That's step one. You've got to know where it's coming from and also understand what it's doing to you. Is it making you tired, have brain fog, be bloated, gain belly fat, have your joints ache? So you've got to know where it's coming from and understand the impact it's having on you. And then you start to taper it down. You don't go cold turkey. You don't quit overnight because that just sets you up to fail. You say, all right, I'm going to take some of these higher sugar impact foods that I've been eating, and, I will start to lower them down to medium sugar impact foods. Simple steps, simple little swaps. And then once you've done that and you really start to focus on food quality, on eating, closer to nature, and making sure each meal has some protein, fat, and fiber, so you got good blood sugar balance, which is key to kicking the sugar habit. Then you can start lowering it some more. But it's just like someone deciding to go into keto. That should be a tapering to get to that point. Like, you want to help someone transition from being a sugar burner to a fat burner, but that doesn't happen overnight. And that period of time where it's not happening will send someone racing towards the cookies if you don't do this correctly.
Right. And that's where we love, and I do this in my practice, is teaching people small, sustainable steps, because those are the steps that are actually they're going to live with it the rest of their life. Because unfortunately, and I know you see it too, where people look at things as a diet and they're going to do it for 6 weeks and then quit, and they don't realize it's an actual lifestyle. So you touched on this with sugar burning versus being a fat burner. So what are some of the, explain that for our audience as well.
Here's the simplest way to tell, because, if you think about it, you want to be a fat burner, not a sugar burner. You don't want to be always burning off the cookies you just ate, and the minute that they're gone, you need more. You want to be able to access stored fat for fuel. You want to be burning off the belly fat, not, burning off the cookies. So the way that you can tell if you are a fat burner is the ability to go 4 to 6 hours between meals, and the ability to burn off belly fat. If you're losing weight, but you're not losing your waist, I always call it the potato on stilts, the shrinking potato on stilts. Your weight's dropped 10 pounds, but your waist hasn't moved at all. You are a sugar burner, not a fat burner. If you have to eat every 2 to 3 hours, you are a sugar burner, not a fat burner. Those are the easiest ways to tell. And again, that shift can happen quickly, but it doesn't happen overnight. And the first thing really is just to focus on having good blood sugar balance to start with. And that really is all about your macronutrient composition of your meal. And again, that's protein, fat, and fiber. That's like the game changer, right? I mean, it's the game changer for feeling good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you share some success stories with me? Like, I'm sure you've got all sorts of readers that have given you feedback, and I know you work with a lot of people too.
Yes. It's interesting. I had one woman, and what's crazy about blood sugar, because we were just talking about that, is it's just slightly elevated blood sugar, say 90, which they're still saying is normal, 5 times the risk of dementia. I mean, that's frightening. We're doing everything we can to live longer, but I don't think you want to live longer without your brain.
Right.
So I had one gal who told me, she goes, I thought I had early dementia, and she didn't want to tell anyone. She goes, but I'd walk into the bedroom and go, why am I here? And those ones, I'd forget to turn the stove off. She goes, I was like inside, I was freaking out. And she went on the sugar impact diet, and 3 weeks, all gone. So, I think so often we go on programs because we want to lose the belly fat. We want to lose a little weight. But I think what I see with most people is the reason that they stay is they go, I had no idea what feeling good really felt like. What the energy is like, getting rid of the brain fog, having a stable mood, what those things can do for you are dramatic. I had another gal who'd been trying to kick sugar for years. She was a PE teacher. And so she would try it, she'd take it out altogether, and then she'd be out on the court with her students, right, on the basketball court, and she'd go, and then I'd go racing over to the Coke machine because she didn't do the transition, right? So you really have to test first, figure out where you're at, and then you need to taper, and then you can go through that transition, and then you don't need to go to the Coke machine. She, within 3 weeks, because we tapered and then did the transition, she was totally fine and able to go hours without needing to eat and didn't have to rely on the next hit of sugar to get her energy. And that's what's really important, because we've got to look at all these things. Like I look at weight and I look at brain fog. I look at all of these things as just symptoms our body is telling us, so we'll have some measurement as to know what's working, what's not. We get so emotionally involved in the scale, but we got to put our Dr. Spock brain on with it and go, all right, what's it telling me here? What's it telling me if I lost weight, but my body fat didn't go down? What's it telling me? Like if I'm just losing muscle, what's really going on here? Or if my waist isn't going down, and what do I need to shift? All of this information is critical for you to know what to do. But here's what I think is super cool. And this I hear from so many people. And I had one guy in particular who was in the food business. And when I met him, he said, I'd love to do your program, but I don't know what I would eat. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. You own a seafood company. Like, what are you talking about? But he had to, because he was in the food business, go to all of these big food shows. And one of them was being put on by a very famous cheesecake company. You can probably figure out which one it was. The one that's got the big stores all over the country and serves the troughs of food. And he goes, he sent me a picture of him standing around all these cheesecakes, like every flavor imaginable. And I'm thinking, oh, this is him sending me a picture to say, sorry, But what he sent me in the next text was, this doesn't even tempt me anymore. I don't even like sugar. It doesn't even taste good. And that's what happens when you go through and you do this correctly, where you taper. You really find out where it's hiding, because most of us don't know. Then you taper it down. Then you transition into being a fat burner. And then you go back and you re-challenge yourself. And what you find is that when you get your taste buds back and you appreciate savory and spicy and sour, that the sweet food just tastes sweet, and it just tastes pretty gross, right?
Right. And then when you realize how you feel with it too afterwards, that's like that whole effect of yeah, I don't think I want to do that again.
That's such an important point, Lisa, is when you connect the dots between what you're eating and how you're feeling and what you weigh, then you can be intelligent about your decision. But so many of us don't realize that afternoon crash was what we did at lunch. And we ate that crappy lunch because of what we ate at breakfast. And we have that second meal phenomenon where we'd already messed up our blood sugar, and it just sets you up for the day.
Right. Absolutely. And so often now we're talking about, or we keep hearing that sugar is actually a drug, right? And I know we talked a little bit about this earlier, but can you feed a little bit more information to because so much, you had mentioned it also, we're talking about sugar and dementia now as well, talking about type 3 diabetes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the role of sugar and the brain and that drug aspect with it.
This is a great way to display it. My kids were in elementary school, and I think my older son was maybe in first grade, and I got a phone call, and the phone call was, come pick up your son. And I go, okay, what's going on? And they go, he's trying to climb the walls, literally. And I go, why? What happened? They go, well, he ate a bag of M&Ms. And I go, well, where did he get the bag of M&Ms? Well, he won the Christmas wrapping paper sales contest, so he won a pound bag of M&Ms. I go, you gave my son a pound bag of M&Ms. You gave a 6-year-old a pound bag of M&Ms. And what did you think would happen? You get him. He's yours. I'm not getting him. But that's a very bad display of what happens when you do this. Is you get that big anxious rush of energy, and then that big crash and burn. If you look at sugar and you start to look at all the major diseases, it either plays a starring role, or it definitely aids it along. I mean, look at sugar and all of the cancers,
Right.
And especially fructose, which we tend to think, oh, fructose, it's from fruit. Well, it's very different if you're eating that apple than if you've pulled the, apple juice concentrate out, which, by the way, you can put on the label of a food and put no sugar added and use apple juice concentrate, which is more fructose than high fructose corn syrup, which is just criminal, because here's moms trying to do well by their kids, buying the thing that says no sugar added, and it's loaded with fructose. And then we're wondering why our kids have fatty liver. Right? I mean, that to me is one of the scariest ones. But they did this study with rats, and they were looking at rats. They fed rats Oreo cookies, and it lit up the pleasure center in their brain. And then they gave them morphine, and it lit up the same pleasure center in their brain. Remember this study? And then they gave them the choice, and they got the Oreo cookies. Yeah. I mean, hello, like you just chose between two drugs. Which one was more powerful? The morphine, like you want the opiate or you want the cookie? They're the same.
And I think it's just people becoming more aware of that. And I feel as if at least now there's that shift that's happening, because people for so long just thought it was just, they grew up with it. It was fine.
Yeah. We need to call it a drug. I'm glad you're saying that over and over again, because, moms need to hear that it is a drug. I know when my kids were little, I'd go to these little school parties and it would just be like a drug fest. Mm-hmm. It would be punch, and fruit roll-ups and just all this garbage. And they'd wonder why the kids are like out of control and, hitting each other.
Climbing the walls and screaming and everything. Exactly. Yeah. That's part of it. So is it, obviously I know the answer to this, but it really is possible for people to get rid of their sweet tooth, or their sweet teeth.
So I was on this really weird show called Freaky Eaters for a couple of seasons. And we did genetic testing on everyone because, genetically you have two things. You can have a sweet tooth and you can be a sweet taster. And that means the more sweet you eat, the more sweet you want. Sweet tooth people will naturally seek out sweet. The sweet taster will want more and more and more, almost like a drug addict. But I believe that's in all of us. And I really think exposure equals preference. I think that we have a sweet tooth for a couple different reasons. And I think genetics are the least of it. I think it's training, right? And stress, because stress lowers serotonin, which is then going to make you want to grab those carbs, grab that sugar for a quick hit. So that's going to be a big one for you. And I think that we can shift this pretty quickly. I think one of the other ones is poor eating. We're not getting the protein and the fat and the fiber we need. We're eating a too high of a carbohydrate, low fiber processed food diet. And it's just keeping you wanting more and more and more. So yes, that was what I set out to prove with the sugar impact diet. I had 700 people go through the trial. And it was interesting because I took the hardest people. So I took the people who did the virgin diet but couldn't get through it because they couldn't get rid of the sugar. So I did not make it this easy. I wanted the people that were self-proclaimed sugar addicts who just felt like they could never get rid of their sweet tooth. And I found that in a matter of weeks, sweet food just tasted gross. And it was, that was one of the biggest things people talked about. They lost inches on their waist, which is what I wanted to see, because that's the barometer, right, of being a fat burner. And sweet foods tasted gross. And that meant that they had freedom, right? They weren't white knuckling it.
I love it. I love it. So where can they find more information? I know you have this podcast, so share with them exactly where they can find all of your information.
Oh my gosh. So the easiest is to go to jjvirgin.com, and that's where you can get the links to my podcast and all the social sites. I do a lot of stuff live on Facebook and Instagram, super fun. And we've got a blog and loads of recipes and books and all that. So we put a lot out all the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everything that you're doing and just helping to shift healthcare and shift the health of our nation and everybody around, I guess, the world, even, just because everybody needs this message now.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I appreciate all of your time today. Thank you.